All right, welcome back. Today we're going to jump into a really cool and kind of fundamental topic in computer science. We're talking about the ultimate showdown, user-level threads versus kernel-level threads. Yeah, this is the stuff that makes all our apps tick. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let me just ask you this. Think about your web browser right now. You've probably got a few tabs open, right? Maybe one is loading a page, another's playing a video, maybe you're even downloading a file. And the whole thing, it just works. It doesn't freeze up. How does it do that? Well, the secret sauce is something called threading. But the real question is, where do these little workers, these threads, actually live? And who's the boss? That's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
So here's the game plan. We'll start by looking at the two arenas where these threads hang out. Then we'll do a head-to-head comparison to see where each one shines. After that, we'll check out how they can actually work together by building a bridge. And we'll wrap it all up with the final takeaway you really need to know.
Okay, let's dive in. To really wrap our heads around this, you gotta know that threads basically live in two totally separate worlds. And it all boils down to one simple question. Who's calling the shots? Is it the app itself? Or is it the big boss, the operating system?
So first up, we've got user-level threads. You can think of these guys as, well, like an application's own secret private team of workers. They're managed by a library that's part of the app itself. And here's the kicker. The main operating system, the kernel, has absolutely no idea they even exist. It's totally oblivious. From the OS's point of view, it just sees one single program running. All that fancy multi-threaded stuff, it's all happening behind a curtain, completely invisible. And then, on the other side of the ring, you've got kernel-level threads. Now these are the official threads. The operating system kernel knows all about them. It creates them, it manages them, it schedules them to run on the processor. It does the whole shebang. They're not hidden at all. They are true first-class citizens in the world of the OS.
Okay, so we've met the two contenders. Now it's time to put them side by side and see how they stack up. This is where we're going to see the real trade-offs between raw speed and, raw power. First thing, speed of creation. Making a new user-level thread is, well, it's blazing fast. Seriously. Why? Because it's all handled inside the application. It's just a simple function call. You don't have to bother the operating system at all. But creating a kernel-level thread, that's a different story. It's slower because you have to make what's called a system call. Basically, you're knocking on the OS's door and asking it to do something for you. That whole process has a lot more overhead.
And that speed advantage doesn't stop there. It carries right over to something called context switching. That's just a fancy term for when the system pauses one thread to let another one run. For user-level threads, this switch is super, super fast. Again, it's all handled internally by the app's own library. But for kernel threads, you guessed it, the OS has to get involved to manage the switch, and that just makes it a much heavier, slower operation. This table here kind of lays it all out perfectly. You can see the hierarchy of speed. At the very bottom, the slowest thing you can do is switch between two completely different processes. That's super heavy. A step up from that is switching between kernel threads. It's faster, sure, but the OS is still involved. And then, way up at the top, the absolute champion of speed, switching between user-level threads. It's the fastest by a long shot.
So at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, user-level threads are the clear winner, right? They're fast, they're efficient. What's the catch? Well, there is a catch, and it is a huge one. It's called the blocking problem. Here's how it works. Imagine one of your little user-level threads needs to do something that takes time, like reading a file from the disk. That's a blocking operation. Now remember, the kernel has no idea about all the other threads in your app. So when it sees that one thread asking for the file, it just goes, okay, I'll put this whole program on pause until the file is ready. And just like that, the entire process gets frozen. All those other threads that were ready to do work, they're all stuck, forced to wait. It completely defeats the whole point of having threads in the first place.
But this is where kernel-level threads swoop in to save the day. They solve this blocking problem perfectly. Why? Because the OS knows about every single one of them. So if one kernel thread needs to block and wait for something, the OS just says, no problem, buddy. You can take a break. I'm going to let this other thread from your same application run for a bit.
And boom, the application stays responsive. It keeps chugging along, making progress, problem solved.
So what we've got is this classic trade-off, right? You've got the insane speed of user threads on one hand, and the powerful, robust nature of kernel threads on the other. It seems like you have to pick one. But what if you didn't have to? What if you could get the best of both worlds? Well, modern systems have found some pretty clever ways to build a bridge between these two.
And that brings us to the core challenge, the big puzzle that system designers had to solve. How do you take all those fast, lightweight, invisible user threads that the application creates and connect them, or map them, to the visible kernel threads that the OS actually knows how to run on the CPU? Figuring out this mapping is the absolute key.
And this puzzle led to basically three main solutions or models. First, you've got the one-to-one model. It's super simple and reliable. For every single user thread you create, you get one dedicated kernel thread. This totally solves the blocking problem, and it's what most modern systems like Linux use. Then there's the many-to-one model. This one is really lightweight because you're piling a whole bunch of user threads onto just a single kernel thread. But it brings back that old blocking problem. If that one kernel thread blocks, all your user threads are stuck. And finally, there's the many-to-many model. This is the hybrid approach. It tries to be clever by mapping a big group of user threads onto a smaller group of kernel threads. It's flexible for sure, but man, it gets really complicated really fast.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground. So what's the big takeaway here? Let's boil it all down to the essentials.
If you only remember one thing from this whole explainer, make it this slide. The difference really boils down to 4 key points. First, who's in charge? Management. Is it the application library or the operating system? Second, speed. User level is way faster for creation and switching, no contest. But third, and this is the absolute deal breaker, blocking. A user level thread can block the entire process. A kernel level thread only blocks itself. That is the fundamental trade-off you always have to think about.
But you know, for all these differences we've been talking about, it's super important to remember what makes them the same. At the end of the day, a thread is a thread. It doesn't matter if it's user level or kernel level, their whole purpose in life is to share resources, like code and data, so that an application can get a lot of work done at the same time, efficiently.
And that really leads to the final question, a question for you to think about. Now that you get the trade-offs, the raw speed of user-level threads versus the safe, simple power of kernel-level threads, which one would you choose? For your next project, what matters more? Is it the absolute peak performance, or is it simplicity and robustness? There's no single right answer, of course. It all depends on what you're trying to build. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.